everyone. My name is Claire Klieger. I'm a Senior Associate Director in Career Services with the distinct pleasure of overseeing the team that works with undergrads in arts and sciences. The college students are my favorite, and I love working on this particular series, the College Alumni Mentoring Series, to showcase opportunities and career paths in different areas and all of the myriad of wonderful things that college alumni do. We are very fortunate this evening to welcome 4 great panelists across different areas of consulting. And I was just telling those panelists before we hopped on, I really feel like Penn is a place where everybody sort of flirts with consulting at some point before they graduate. It's the #1 destination for students in the college after they graduate. But there's also, I think, somewhat of a mystique around what is consulting, what does it look like, how do you get into it, you know, what does the career path look like? And so we're going to try and unpack some of these issues during this evening. Thank you, students, for submitting questions in advance. I'm going to be pulling from many of those questions to have our conversation, and there'll be time at the end as well for some direct audience Q&A. I know people feel free, you know, students, to sort of have your camera off during the first part of this. I understand that that's, you know, but then at the end, you know, if we're going to have you submit a question, you can feel free to put those questions in the chat and we will take them later. So welcome. Thank you to Gwen, who has just put our bio sheets of all of our illustrious panelists in the chat so that you can kind of follow along and have a little more information about each panelist background. But I'm going to get out of the way now and turn it over. I'm going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves to say a little bit about how they got into consulting, their specific area of consulting, and, you know, what keeps them doing it. So if we'll just sort of go in alphabetical order by first name. So Bowen, you want to kick us off?
Sure, happy to do so. Welcome, everyone. It's great to be back on campus. So Bowen Posner, I graduated from Penn in the college in '04 and got into consulting in sort of a circuitous, roundabout way. After about 10 or 11 years in education, I decided to make the leap into consulting after kind of engaging at higher level sort of strategic conversations in the education space. And I work for EY-Parthenon. I'm a director based out of Chicago. They have a fairly large education practice. So I participate in that. I've also done work in consumer and retail and manufacturing. So kind of took me out of my comfort zone in education, which was exciting. And that's what I think is keeping me interested in consulting, is that every day, every project is sort of a new challenge, a new puzzle, whether it's a new sector for me and my teams, or it's a new problem emerging in a sector we're familiar with. It's exciting and ever changing, and you're kind of responding to these problems in new and creative ways and trying to think outside the box. And to me, that keeps it light, keeps it exciting and dynamic. So it's very easy to stay plugged in that capacity.
Wonderful, thank you. Ella, would you take it away next?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. It's great also to virtually be back on campus. My name is Ella, and I graduated from the college in 2015, and I work for Booz, Allen, Hamilton. I'm an associate, which is one of the arbitrary levels. That means I'm just one of the consultants that delivers on client work. And so Booz Allen is primarily a government consulting firm. And that's what really brought me into consulting. If anyone had met me at Penn, I never wanted to be in consulting. I always wanted to be a public servant or working in government. But for me, as I was looking to explore a career in public service, especially after getting my master's degree, it seemed that there were so many opportunities, as Bowen mentioned, for flexibility, mobility, ability to try new projects and try different skills within this government space in a consulting environment. And so I would say for me, that's really what's kept me in consulting. In many ways, I get the experience of a government public servant. Like, I wanted all of my work that I do day to day is for the government. I've got great government hours, great government like benefits, but I have that ability For example, if you were a government employee, it would be pretty unheard of to switch from one agency to a completely different agency in a year, 2 years, whereas in the consulting space, you can move from one agency to a completely different function in 6 months, 8 months. And it really gives you that ability to learn these different functions, be a part of these different agency missions, and in my opinion, get to have more of an impact across the government in different ways than I would as a typical government employee. And so, yeah, I am really excited to speak to you all. Happy to answer any more questions about government consulting specifically. And I'll turn it back to you, Claire.
Thank you. I think that's such a great example, and you'll hear more about these tonight. I think many students at Penn think just about sort of management strategy consulting, and it takes them a little while longer to realize, any area that you might be interested in, there's a consulting, there's consulting opportunities within that. There's this whole other world of boutique, consulting that, and niche consulting that exists out there. So thanks for starting us down that path. David, tell us about you and your path to consulting.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Great to meet you all. I am also a 2015 college grad, same as Ella. We didn't know each other, but I was just checking our LinkedIn, and we have, I think, 65 or something mutual connections. So I'm sure we ran into each other at all the various Penn establishments. But I'm currently a senior consultant with Deloitte. I'm a bit on the newer side. I just started with the firm this past September after graduating from business school from down at Duke this past spring. And prior to business school, I spent 4 years in kind of a tangential industry to consulting at a primary research provider that works with a lot of consulting firms. So I got to kind of see how a bunch of the different firms operate, the different types of projects they work on, got an understanding of the lay of the land, was kind of wanting a break from work, and had always thought about going back to business school. So that was kind of the natural next step. And when I was there, realized I was ready to really dive deeper into some of the problems that my previous clients were working on. So here I am. I'm based in our Denver office until travel comes back, if it does. And Deloitte's a pretty massive company. Consulting is just one of our 4 divisions. And then within consulting, there's everything under the sun that a consultant could do. I'm specifically focused in our strategy and analytics practice, looking to do some of the more core strategy consulting type work. Why I took this job and why I'm excited about it and have been really enjoying it so far. I think the most common thing you'll hear from consultants is the breadth of experience you get and the fact that nothing is nothing stays the same for a very long period of time. There's always opportunities to work with new clients, new types of problems, different types of engagements. I know our business as well has been really exploring the kind of buzzwordy areas that consultants are looking to get into. So whether it's our new AI in digital practice, or we even have a new group within our strategy practice that's focused purely on helping companies determine what their purpose is and how they can more effectively convey that to both their employees and their customers, since that's becoming a more integral part of the business world. I think the possibilities and opportunities are pretty endless, which until I decide what I want to do, I'll just keep trying new things out.
Wonderful. And we were just chatting with David about how he may be experiencing some snow out there in Denver soon. So that's also
very excited. Fingers crossed.
this time of year. So Harrison, last but certainly not least, do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey into consulting?
Absolutely. And mine's been a little bit more circuitous, I think, along the lines of Bowen. So I graduated. Let's see.
Sorry, go ahead, Harrison.
No worries. Can everyone hear me? Zoom was telling me I was muted, so weird.
I was trying to spotlight you and I hit mute instead. I'm so sorry. Go right ahead.
So I graduated from Penn in 2006 with a degree in astrophysics. So I spent a lot of time over in DRL. And following that, did 2 years as a lab technician to transfer really into a biology focused program where I did my PhD, really focused on neutrophil chemotaxis. And that got me into consulting in the life sciences space. And so I've been there about 7 years now. And it's really strategy focused and working with biopharmaceuticals, the biotechs, large pharma, even investment companies, and even companies that you wouldn't even really think of as being in the life sciences space, really helping them think through their strategies when it comes to developing new therapeutics or diagnostics, or trying to understand market access for therapeutics that are coming up or on the market. And what really drew me to consulting was kind of a recognition that I really liked the science, but I wanted the variety that, going from astrophysics into biology, I enjoyed all of that, wanted to learn. And consulting has been that, for 7 years, 2 years here on Consulting Group, now 5 years at Clearview Healthcare Partners, where I'm engagement manager. I get to work on a broad range of topics. Right now, I'm on 3 projects that cover rare disease, neuropsychiatric, and dry eye. And so there's a ton of variety, kind of echoing what Ella was talking about, of just being able to cover so many different topics and learn about so many different things. And it's also been a career that, for me, getting into the science to start with, but then as it's progressed, being able to work in that team environment and have the mentoring opportunities and the teaching opportunities, the client interactions, and being able to help people solve their problems has just been really interesting and really enjoyable for the last 7 years.
Great, thank you. This is a wonderful introduction to this topic for this evening. We're so thrilled to have you all here. We appreciate you giving your time over this evening. I think there's a perception at Penn, especially among arts and sciences students, though I firmly believe it's a misconception, that if you're in the college, you're at a disadvantage if you want to go into a business field like consulting. And I'm going to tease out in a bit, even your graduate degrees, right? Like some of you have MBAs and others of you have, different discipline graduate degrees. But can you talk a little bit about how your experience at Penn prepared you for a world for the world of consulting work, and in particular, what are some of the transferable skills you think exist from a liberal arts education that are an advantage in the consulting space? So I don't know, Ella, you want to maybe start?
Sure. So what's interesting is, I was a psychology major at Penn, and my whole career goal in the very beginning was actually to be a clinical social worker. And it wasn't until I went to graduate school for social work that I discovered my love for government and public service. And that's what led me more, I would say, substantively to a government field. But day to day, I feel like I use my psychology and social work skills for the most part in what I do. So much of consulting is being able to understand and empathize what a client's needs and wants are, being able to read in between the lines between what they're saying versus what they actually want. It's also, as Harrison mentioned, really being able to be a strong team player and collaborator, something I learned very well from all the group projects I did at Penn. Also being an excellent written and verbal communicator. I know everyone hates writing seminar, but it ends up being useful. There is so much communication you just have to do, whether it's an email form, whether it's in a long form research report, whether it's in a memo, whether it's in a presentation. And I would also say, especially in consulting, having a more malleable mind that is excited and willing to pick up new disciplines and learn new things more quickly and in a more rapid pace is so useful in consulting, because so much of what you do is not about coming in as the expert, but coming in as someone who is willing to pick up these new skills quickly and execute upon them in rapid timeframes. And so I would say in many ways, you're at an advantage if you have an interdisciplinary liberal arts education that prepares you for that love of learning, that love of collaborating, that love of writing and speaking and working with clients and stakeholders.
I think to layer on for that in terms of how we think about it at Clearview is we actually prefer the science background because we'll teach you the business. You pick that up, we take you through onboarding, we'll teach you all the tricks of the trade in terms of how to understand the strategic goals. That's part of the progression of your career in consulting. But it's that science background, the ability to dive deep in the science when needed. And then to Ella's point, pull that out and be able to communicate the key points and not just be a flood of data, but get to, in 30 seconds, what do you actually need to know about this product? And why is it going to be a good one? Or why is it going to fail?
One piece I would add, so I was a PPE major at Penn. it's something I've seen so far in consulting, and it's, it's a part of the interview process as well, is, at the end of the day, we're being brought in to give a recommendation to our clients, right? A lot of times. So you're trying to convince them who they've been working in, their industry for many more years than, I likely have. And I'm sitting at a table giving them, or at a Zoom, giving them kind of an argument of here's what I see and why, we recommend you do X, Y, Z. And I think the skills that I remember from philosophy classes, particularly poli-sci as well, about understanding like premises of an argument, how you build a cohesive argument. Totally echo what Ella said about the writing, being concise and effective in your communication, and basically taking that from beginning to end, the whole picture, and packaging it and delivering it in a way that's super convincing to a client. That's like half of the game at the end of the day. Understanding what it all is, that comes at the beginning. But I think the skills I learned in some of those philosophy essays and reading these complicated, age-old arguments is still super relevant.
I don't have a whole lot to add. You all have covered it pretty well. You learn the fundamentals the first couple of years in the job through the trainings that these firms provide. So you're going to learn slideware, PowerPoint, etc. You're going to learn Excel if you don't have that. It's an expectation, and there's plenty of tools of the trade that you'll pick up, but it's the synthesis, and kind of think of it as the start of each project is like the start of a semester of a class. You get a big syllabus with a lot of reading. Maybe you do it all, maybe you don't, but you have to learn how to synthesize all of it really quickly for papers, for exams, for presentations. And I find that people who can write well, people who communicate effectively, come from all different backgrounds. Liberal arts is good at facilitating that and honing those skills, which are more difficult, I think, to learn over the long run than it is to learn Excel functions and PowerPoint shortcuts and things like that, which you will pick up pretty quickly.
Great. So you've talked about sort of the need for strong communication skills, critical thinking, the ability to sort of synthesize information and make recommendations. Harrison, you mentioned like understanding your clients' industries and sort of being kind of informed about what's happening there. What do you think are additional things that folks need to really be successful in this field? And if somebody wants to, especially if there's sort of first year students on here who, maybe for whom looking for internships in consulting is a little challenging after their first year, like what are things that students can be doing now or throughout their time at Penn to take the most advantage of opportunities or to best prepare themselves to succeed if they know that they are interested in or are, exploring consulting?
I mean, so I'll start it out, and I think it's just talking to people and learning about the different types of consulting, like these forums, reaching out to alumni that are at different companies to just hear about their experience, because as we said at the beginning, the world of consulting is so vast and there's so many different things that you can do. What I do for consulting is not something my wife would ever be interested in doing. And she's a clinician, so she's very much in the life sciences space. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is just understanding the whole idea of a case interview. Because I think I've seen plenty of people that have been interested in consulting that probably would have been good at consulting, and they're just not prepared for that interview, because there's the aspect of then just being prepared to demonstrate the skills to get that opportunity.
So let's dive into the case piece for a second. I know this is something that students find initially kind of nebulous and overwhelming, and there's a lot of prep that needs to go into it. We have lots of resources to help students navigate this process, and students, check out our consulting community page for like a whole host of things related to prepping for this. But I sometimes see when I'm interviewing students or doing mock case interviews, there's both being like totally underprepared, but I feel like there's also maybe a fear of being over prepared and having that dilute creativity. What are some, key pitfalls that you see, like common mistakes that people make during cases? And what are some things that on the flip side of that really make candidates stand out as part, during the casing process in a positive way? So I don't know, Bowen, yeah, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I think I'll talk generally, and then I'll talk about some specifics, because many of the consultancies do casing differently, depending on the phase of the process. So at a base level, talking through your thought processes in a structured way is critical. Showing organized thinking, showing sort of mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, MECE sort of frameworks is kind of baseline, right, for a lot of these interviews. And then where I see a lot of folks stumble when they get kind of past that point is on various dimensions. They fail to sort of headline and close out the phases of the case. Meaning, if you're presented with information, you have to not only observe and explain that observation, but you need to articulate the so what. Why is this important to the question at hand? Why is this important to the narrative that you're creating for the case? And you need to lead that and drive that forward. And usually it stops at observation, and there's not a synthesis or an insight that people derive from that in a really succinct way, not sort of rambling like I am, but like actually saying like, this is the takeaway here. We do things a little differently in some of our interviews where we have group cases where a few people join and present on material that they're given as a group after a half an hour or 45 minutes of talking together. And sometimes people can be a little, like a pitfall is being too domineering in the group, not opening up for discourse and a sharing of ideas and in a conversation where there's an openness to disagreement and a constructive progression as a team. So, just be mindful if you're confronted with that kind of a situation of having a dialogue or a discourse and being supportive and collaborative while also sort of driving the team forward. Those are just a couple of things I would observe, but happy for the other panelists to weigh in.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I guess first to answer the previous question too, because I had a thought that I think is worth saying, and then I'll talk about casing. Something you can do to prepare yourself, especially if you're, on the younger side of college right now, a freshman or a sophomore. I think that there's a lot in business and in consulting that you don't learn in school. School is just so theoretical. I remember when I kind of realized I was interested in this type of thing was when my uncle, who owns a bunch of kind of small businesses, was just complaining at dinner one day about, how sales weren't doing well for one of he owned like an ink cartridge refilling business. It's called Cartridge World. If any of you have seen it, it's like a franchise. And I was super interested in it. And I ended up just asking if I could talk it out with him. If you have a family friend, or, I'm sure there are organized ways you can get them to kind of nonprofit consulting as well. But, having a real world experience, even if it's a restaurant or an independent store or something like that, where you can go in and say, what's to the owner or the manager, what is not working for you right now? And then let me help you figure out why and what we can do to solve it. If they give you some of their, numbers and their Excel sheets, I think you'll learn more from that, whether you'd be interested in this type of work than you would with anything else, at least in terms of broad strategy consulting. In terms of casing, echo everything Bowen said. I would say there's two parts to me. The over prepping, Claire, that you kind of mentioned. I think there's a lot of merit in understanding the building blocks, and particularly if you are in the college and you haven't had exposure to some of the more kind of business concepts or kind of core finance concepts that honestly you don't even really dig too deep into in school. But things like, understanding when and why calculating a break-even rate would be important, or a return on the investment, or, just understanding some of those really basic frameworks. You really need to have those in your toolkit so that you understand when and why to pull them out throughout the case interview. But then I think, to me, the most important part of a case interview is how you handle the pushback and the ambiguity and the interviewer's various kind of quirks, because they're all going to interact with you in different ways. that honestly shines more sometimes than if you get the math right or if you are going down the right path. But how you respond when somebody says, no, that's not exactly right. What do you think next? Or, no, that's a good idea, but, that's not going to work in this situation. What next? Being able to maintain your cool, handle, the pivot with poise, while also, and this is the tough part, coming up with the next idea and kind of moving forward seamlessly. That's just as important as, having 12 frameworks and 16 equations memorized in the back of your head.
Great, thank you. I don't know if anybody else was really, it looks like Harris, was there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would say what you said, David, is more important than having those 12 frameworks. I think I would kind of distill it down to the two key components that I look for whenever I interview someone are, can you structure your thought process, and can you communicate that thought process clearly? Because that's the biggest part of the job. It doesn't matter what framework you use, as long as the framework makes sense and you can communicate it and get the client behind it. The third thing that I would kind of throw in there is kind of this ambiguity, the comfort with brainstorming, but being clear about how you're getting there. It's okay to be wrong, as long as you kind of explain how the thought process to get there and the baseline that you're starting from. Because then you can always go back and adjust the data that you have, and that might get you to a different landing point. But if I don't see the thought process behind it, I don't know how you got there.
Yeah, all great points. I think are really things that I share with students too, but it's much more effective having it come directly from you. I think there are questions about sometimes when's the best time to get into consulting, as people sort of try and strategize around this. And I'm really interested to sort of look at the two sort of divergent paths that exist on this panel, because, some of you went kind of right out of school, whether like for Ella, for you, that was, you went to graduate school first and then went into this space. And David, your work in Alpha Sites and folks, Alpha Sites hires tons of Penn students. That's a very common pathway, sort of tangentially into consulting. So something to keep your eye on. But both Bowen and Harrison, you had sort of different, you had like lives and careers before before consulting. Bowen, your background in education first. I mean, you did then go and get an MBA, but can you talk a little bit about what you think the the best or most optimal way is to think about getting into this, if this is something that you're considering? So maybe if we can start with the non-traditional folks, Bowen and Harrison. So either of you two, go ahead.
Yeah,
Bowen.
I mean, I'm happy to share. So my background is probably not the way to do this, if I had to be perfectly honest. I went to Penn and then became a teacher and taught for a while, and then thought education was my future. And then I went into higher ed and spent a long time there. And then got an MBA and then got into consulting, which was really took a long time. And if you're like eager to do this, explore it now. But I think Harrison was the one who mentioned it before. It's just talking to people now, if you're kind of curious, is the way to really explore if this is right for you, and exploring broadly across firms and across, career paths to see like, does this make sense for me now? You can always come to consulting. They're always looking for talented people, especially now. I think we're all hiring like bananas, but the reality for me was it took me a long time to realize I wanted to be engaged in the strategic conversations of organizations and companies day to day. And I was working in an environment where those kind of conversations, especially in education, don't happen all the time. There's a much longer time frame for change and strategic shifts. And consulting offered this opportunity to have that be my day-to-day work. And I just found that more interesting and exciting. I just came to that realization later in life than perhaps some of the panelists here. And but I echo again what Harrison and others have said. the timing has to be right for you, and curiosity and engagement with alumni and acquaintances who can shed light on what they actually do. And if that's actually resonating with you, I think is the most important first step. And you can have that at any point in your life, but you might as well start now if you're curious. And the light bulb will go off through your conversations as to whether or not it makes sense at this juncture in your career trajectory, or if something else makes sense, whether it's getting involved in, I don't know, venture capital, or whether it's getting involved in government or getting involved in industry. Those conversations will lead to enlightenment, hopefully, in some capacity. But consulting will always be here, so you can come to it at any juncture, whether you're later in life or right out of college, I think.
Yeah, I would echo that. And I think for me, the big part is also like, what's your end goal, right? There are people that enter consulting that really want to stay in consulting their entire life. And they want to get up to that partner level. They want to be able to sell projects and collaborate with clients. There are others where consulting is kind of one step along their career path. And at Clearview, we see people leave after a few years, go to med school, right? They kind of, it's an opportunity outside of school to learn new things, make some money, right, to pay for med school, because it's not cheap. We see people go on to pharma companies, right? They like the thinking, they like being in the space, but they want to have something that they can kind of own. And you don't get that with consulting. You get the strategic thinking, but you don't get to carry things through. And some get to do that in pharma or venture capital or private equity. There are a number of different routes that you can take. The clearer sense you have of where you eventually want to end up and what you'd be interested in, I think the better sense you're going to have of where you want to go with consulting and when you want to go into consulting.
Yeah, great points on both sides. Ella and David, then, if you're sort of looking at this like straight out of school, how does that process look different, or is there any other advice or strategies that you would share with students, and maybe also particularly students who at this point in this, like if they're seniors or even if not, like feel like at least for this upcoming summer or upcoming graduation that there's this constant feeling of like, I'm behind, or there's nothing left, or right, like, if I want to capitalize on immediate opportunities, how do I do that?
So I'm actually going to echo something that David said earlier, but consulting, and I think we all mentioned something of this sort, consulting is a great way to get exposure to a wide variety of functions, roles, and responsibilities that can help establish that baseline in your career if you're not truly sure yet what it is you want to do, and build a really fundamental set of skills that you can carry with you at any point. So in many ways, it's a really wise way to start your career. I know a lot of people start at Booz Allen because government doesn't typically hire fresh graduates unless you're a Pathways Fellow or a Presidential Management Fellow. So it's a great way to start in government, but also to then get to explore all these different areas of government that you wouldn't in a 2-year fellowship or a typical government appointment. And funny enough, like Harrison mentioned, a lot of people come and go from Booz Allen for different ways. People will go for political appointments or for roles in government, or people will go running from government and say, I want to be in industry, I want to be paid more, and I want to have a faster paced environment. And so it's really helpful, as they mentioned, at any point in your career where you're just realizing I need to try something new, I need to be exposed to new areas, and I need to learn more about myself and what's out there so I can further my career. And then for some people, for example, I see myself staying at Booz Allen for a while because it is that great marriage for me of government work, but with that flexibility and mobility. But for others, you may find that this isn't right for me. And so I think it's a great step to take early in your career, but also, as Harrison and Bowen mentioned, at later points.
Yeah, it's a tough question. I'm trying to think how I would answer it. I would say, I remember when I was at Penn, as I'm sure many of you have felt the pressure, and Claire, you kind of alluded to it, that, I need to do this because everybody's doing it. Like banking was a big thing when I was at Penn that I remember getting pulled into. I absolutely hate finance. It's a blessing that I got rejected from pretty much every, bulge bracket bank, because that would have been miserable. And I can't even tell you the number of people from my class that are, and so it's a great job too. I don't want to say it's not. If you're interested in it, that's amazing. I still spend tons of time in Excel on a day-to-day basis. It's just a much different way of thinking about it. I would say, yeah, and I think Harrison mentioned this earlier, but really like do your due diligence on understanding, the different firms that you're interested in and what your day-to-day would be like in consulting. Because I also know plenty of people that, put in so much effort to, this was the end all be all and never took the kind of life pause that they needed to do to make sure this is what they're passionate about and interested in, and have all since switched jobs too. For me, what was really nice is I really like the business and strategic thinking. I like being exposed to a ton of different industries and not having to, pick one and pigeonhole myself in this early on in my career. And I have found that I thrive in kind of the high pressure environment, which I don't think it's a secret that this isn't the easiest, slow paced job where, you can sign off whenever you want all the time. Maybe for the government side, Ella, I'm a little bit jealous, but the job isn't necessarily a walk in the park. But I think if you know yourself, and you're all at Penn, so you're all smart people, but if you know yourself and you can thrive in that type of environment, it can be a great place to launch your career and can open just a whole host of a number of different doors. I don't know where I see myself in, I think it's staying at least 2 years is always a good kind of frame of reference, or my mother would kill me. But I could see myself staying longer. I think the management opportunity is really exciting. I haven't decided if going kind of the partner route, which Harrison kind of alluded to this too, but there's different responsibilities the more you move up the food chain, essentially, in most of these firms, and it tends to be somewhat similar. And I'm not totally sure if I'm interested in the partner level responsibilities. I see a lot of appeal of getting a different experience, maybe in 5-6 years and joining a startup or something like that. So not a very concise answer, not doing well in my consulting skills, but long story short is I would say really understand kind of what you're getting into and make sure it's something you think you're interested in, you'll be successful in, and is going to help you in whatever your long-term goals are. As Harrison mentioned, for me, my long-term goal is still kind of a question mark, which is why this makes sense. And I know it'll be helpful regardless of whether I stay in the industry or switch into something adjacent.
And one thing I'll add to what David said is it's really important to recognize that what you want now may not be what you want in a few years. For example, if you're a fresh graduate, you probably have less commitments outside of work. You can dedicate yourself to longer hours. You probably want to build more capital potentially to go to graduate school or to just, start establishing yourself, pay off student loans, so forth. Whereas later in your life, for example, I'm newly married. We're looking to buy a house and have children soon. I am definitely trying to stay in that 9-to-5 government. And I think it's really important to understand that where you are and what you want from your career can really change, and therefore where you go in your career. For example, people switch firms all the time based on the different things that firms can offer can really change. And one just practical thing that really helped me when I was searching is I actually set up a table and I noted each factor that was important for me when assessing a firm, whether it was culture, work-life balance, salary, types of clients, path to promotion, and so forth. And then I would recommend meeting with at least 2 alumni just to get disparate perspectives from each firm you're interested in. Yes, very much so, David. And then really looking at that table and comparing and contrasting which firm is standing out to me, and never apply to just one firm. That's not very wise, but really start to narrow down, you're not going to want to apply to every single consulting firm out there. So which ones are really standing out for you in those categories? And I think it'll just be a great visual and mental exercise for all of you in an otherwise very opaque world.
So David and Ella, you couldn't have more perfectly set me up for my next question. And I have a feeling, Harrison, this is going to lead into something you might have said anyway, but I think people are really more focused now, as they should be, on culture and fit. And, finding, and if they're not, they should be thinking about that, finding organizations that are going to help them thrive, or where they can be fully their authentic selves. And, Ella, you talked at the beginning about sort of work-life balance being a value, and that table exercise sounds amazing. David, you talked about how the, high pressure, fast paced environment was something, that was a better culture fit for you. So, for all students, what advice do you have? And Harrison, I'll give you the first crack at this, for how do you then identify those organizations, those firms that are going to be most in line with your values and, the things that you're looking for with culture.
I mean, and this goes back to something that I said at the beginning. It's about talking to people, right? The more people you talk to at the firm, the better sense you get of who are the people you'd be working with. And I think for me, as I reflect back on what my interview process was like, where it clicked for me was recognizing that those interviews are not just the opportunity for the company to learn about me, it's the opportunity for me to learn about the company. If I don't click with the interviewer, there's probably a good chance that I'm not going to click with the company as a whole. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. There may be other aspects that you like that can offset that, but the more you talk to people, the better sense you're going to get of what that company's actually like. And I don't know that there's any better way to get at that.
I just jump in here and echo those comments fully. And I think with the conversations you all have with people at these firms, you need to be extremely targeted with your questions around what's vital to you, right? Is it mentorship? Is it career trajectory? Is it pathway to partner? Is it exit opportunities? That might be a tricky one because you don't want to lead with, oh, I want to leave. But, really boiling it down to 5 to 10 nuggets of questioning that can really inform your go or no go decision as to whether or not this is a firm where you could have a future, I think is so critical. Because oftentimes I'll do these conversations with students or either even people in industry about getting into consulting, and it's like their questions are just sort of generic and not, I would imagine if I were in their shoes, that my responses wouldn't be super helpful. So trying to frame up the conversation as best you can. One, it gives you information you need, and two, it actually impresses the people talking to you because you're like, oh, this person's actually thinking about some important things related to who they are and their cultural and or professional fit with this place. So it's not enough to have the conversation. You have to have conversations that are actually kind of substantive.
And I would add, I think it's really important to have these conversations prior to the interview, because in an interview, there is that pressure of, I need to impress them, I'm trying to get this job. Whereas when you have the conversation with an alumnus, a personal connection, someone in your network, you can be more candid and more discerning in what they are saying and in what you're asking, because there are no stakes in the conversation.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add. The only thing I would mention is, particularly with a lot of these firms, they're quite large, right? So I think when Bowen mentioned being targeted with the whole process of networking, the nebulous word, it applies not only to the questions you're asking, but also the people you're reaching out to. So be super thoughtful about, like if you're looking at their LinkedIn, are they working in areas that you're interested in? Are they in an office that you're interested in? Particularly with the large firms, there can even be cultural differences within some of the offices, right? And each firm has different methodologies for how they prioritize and staff different types of projects. And certain industries are more focused in certain offices. Certain industries tend to even have different cultures for those projects that kind of mimic the industries that they're consulting to. There's a lot more nuance than just saying, what's the culture at, Deloitte, for example. It's a 100,000 person company. I don't think you can answer that question, right? But what's the culture within the, senior consultant community in the Denver office? That to me sold me on this job, right? Like when I met all those people, as Harrison mentioned, and also understood the community they had, the mentorship, the breadth of experiences that they were getting, that to me was kind of the convincing piece.
Yeah, this is also important. So go ahead.
I was going to layer on one other point to what Ella said in terms of having these conversations before the interview. You're going to be better prepared for the interview than in that case. And you're going to know what things to highlight in that interview in terms of what you're interested in about the company. You'll have talked to people. It will be very apparent that you are interested in that company, which also makes the interviewer more interested in you.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of this. I put some resources here in the chat for students to sort of think more strategically about this. And I think what I'm hearing you say is it's like quality over quantity for these conversations. And I think the misperception that a lot of folks have about networking is that it's very transactional, right? If I can't get someone to put my resume on the right pile, then what's the point? and I'm really pleased to hear you talking about, well, the point is that to gather information, that it's a chance for you to learn, and the more you learn, the better tailored your questions become, the better tailored your application materials become as you apply, and the more prepared you are for interviewing and evaluating fit for all of these opportunities too. Ella, I'm happy to have you jump in. I'm also going to now allow time for Q&A. So whatever you were going to say, you can feel free to say. And students, if you feel free to either throw a question in the chat if you want, and I can ask it, or if you want to ask our panelists directly, you can raise your hand, and we can call on you. So be adding while Ella's talking, be adding whatever questions you have or raising your hand.
I was just going to add to what Harrison said. It's, I'm an admissions interviewer, alumni admissions interviewer, and I often get asked about the YPEN question. And it's very similar. You don't want to apply to every consulting firm like they are the same thing or with a blanket one. You really want to have a deep understanding. This is why I want to be at Booz Allen, and it's because of X cultural reason, X professional development reason, and so forth. And that's the kind of information that you can get from an informational interview. And one thing I would add, Claire mentioned quality over quantity. I would recommend trying to speak to more than one person at each firm. As David mentioned, there can be such cultural differences depending on where someone is. For example, within Booz Allen, we split our accounts based on the agencies they tailor to. And I've seen cultural differences between our defense and our civilian accounts, probably for very obvious reasons. And so I think it's really important not to have quantity for the sake of quantity, but just to really ensure that you have a deeper understanding of the firm and its nuances.
Okay, great. Do we have any questions from our audience? Everyone stepped away from their computer. They're just sort of semi there in Zoom. Oh, here's our first question. Great. Thank you, Cameron. What are some of the firms that I should be looking into if I'm interested in healthcare consulting? So obviously Clearview is on the list, but Harrison, you want to take this one? What are some others that you would recommend? Deloitte has a healthcare, branch too. So David, you can feel free to speak up, but what would you suggest? Yeah,
I mean, it kind of, there's a number of them. I continue to learn about new ones every day, I think. Boutique, obviously the big pharma, or the big ones, McKinsey, BCG, Deloitte, they all have life sciences practices that will do a breadth of different things. So it depends on, I would look at it as kind of those big consulting companies that will do a lot of different things. And you've got boutique that will specialize a little bit more. So Clearview, we do a lot of strategy. We tend to be a little bit more earlier stage in terms of what we focus on. You'll find companies that are a little bit more later stage for products that are already on the market, or launch planning, or things like that. You can have Clarion Healthcare, which tends to be maybe a little bit more rare disease focused. There's several others, and this, of course, is the moment that I would blank on all the names, but there are a number of them out there, and I would just do a look for healthcare or life sciences consulting, and just see what's out there, whether it's LinkedIn, Google searches, and just start from there. And then as you're talking to people, just understand what companies they've talked to. I talked to probably about a half a dozen, if not more, companies when I was interviewing. So I can certainly share those experiences. Health Advances is another one. Huron used to be in terms of the life sciences. They sold their life sciences practice to.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Cross that one.
Just recently. But they do have healthcare that is more hospital operations focused. So also keep that in mind, that healthcare doesn't always mean the same thing when you look across the different companies.
And if you are interested in government health agencies, I'm actually on a project right now with the Veterans Health Administration, and a lot of what I do is actually consulting on their healthcare practices. So even though it's within a government setting, it is healthcare consulting. So that is another option too.
That's so interesting, Ella. I love how, with all these different things, it just continues to reinforce how interdisciplinary this all is, which is, again, why college students are so well prepared, because that's the whole focus of the college educational experience, is this sort of interdisciplinary stuff. So we have a question now from Sarah. What are the points in the year that are best to go through recruiting for summer internships? And I'm guessing like the time frame might be different for, obviously I know it's different for a place like Deloitte, David, versus and Clearview versus like, you know, I don't know, other smaller places.
Yeah, I mean, my impression is that there's like the formalized career service endorsed recruiting processes, right? Where the firms descend on campus, there's resume drops all around the same time in the fall, perhaps. And then there's more kind of bespoke processes with some of the smaller firms or more boutique firms where a lot of it is built on relationships, and then they have sort of a more fluid dynamic when it comes to internship. But I don't have an insider perspective on those, so I would defer to the panelists. But at least on our end, you know, it's a very formalized process that takes place early in the school year as firms are trying to sort of staff up their summer intern classes.
It's the same for Clearview. We've got our analyst recruiting that's on campus, and consultant recruiting that's also on campus all around the same time. And the interns, I think, happen right after we do the analyst recruiting. So again, it comes down, talk to the company, understand what it is they do as far as internships.
Booz Allen also does the formalized on-campus recruiting, but we also do open up a requisition for students to apply directly if we don't do on-campus recruiting on your school. And all of the information for both internship as well as full-time recruiting is on our website, and I think is for most firms. So definitely be sure to do that research.
Yeah, we also, I'm sure, I'm not as involved in the undergrad recruiting, but I'm sure we have a pretty formal timeline. But I think a more important point I would mention is the numbers in terms of hiring at, you know, our firm, and I'd imagine everybody's, changed fairly drastically from year to year. You know, when COVID was happening at the beginning, the hiring numbers were down super low, and then business has been kind of booming, as Bowen alluded to, for all the consulting firms. So now targets are much higher. So I would, all that's to say is if you do apply for an internship and it doesn't work out, that's not to say it might not work out if you apply for full-time. Oftentimes there's more spots for full-time since they're, you know, really investing in you and they know you're going to be there for ideally a longer period of time.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm gonna skip around in order here just because I think this is a really good question from Niraj. What are some good places to intern over the summer that might not necessarily be in consulting? Often, you know, I'm finding that the competition for internships within consulting is even greater than the competition for full-time jobs in consulting. So what would your recommendations be around other areas? And I think, you know, David, you gave a good example of this even in terms of like exploring, but like finding ways where you can add value or impact. But I'm curious to hear what you all think in terms of, you know, other good feeder experiences to consulting.
I think one of the things that we look for just in terms of recruiting is an interest in life sciences. So it doesn't have to be in consulting. It doesn't have to be specifically consulting related, but something that just shows that you're interested in that space, right? Know where you want to go and do something that helps you get along that, whether it's directly consulting related or not.
I do a lot of work with the post or the MBA recruiting, but it's kind of similar in the sense that it's like an inflection point in your life trajectory, and it's not so much about doing a consulting specific summer outside of, you know, the external consulting firms, but it's kind of doing interesting things where you have an impact that's discernible. And it would be great if you could sort of hone some of the skills that are requisite, like data analytics or you know, demonstrating impact in terms of savings or growth opportunities for a company, but that's hard to do as an intern, right? So I think it boils down to doing something that you're curious about, conveying how you worked as a good teammate, how you took ownership, how you led to how that combined led to some impact that you were able to deliver on in a really short period of time. And that can take many forms. And that could be in industry. I can think back to some of my internships in college, but they didn't get me a job in consulting. But my career in education was interesting, and I was able to demonstrate some impact, and that helped. Showed leadership, showed teamwork, showed impact. And I think you can do that in any number of things across, atypical jobs and what one might describe as typical pipelines for consulting. So I tend to tell people, like, don't pigeonhole yourself and do something that you don't find attractive or interesting just for the sake of the end goal of getting a job in consulting. Look to things that are interesting, buy into that. You'll be really excited to go, and then you can do a knockout job and demonstrate that on a resume versus someone who kind of dragged their feet through the summer, kind of not enjoying what they were doing and perhaps not as engaged with it.
Yeah, I would echo the kind of trying to add value, which it is tough as an intern, right? You're only there for probably 10 weeks, one of which you'll be in training, one of which at the very end will be kind of wrapping everything up. To me, I don't think, especially if you're going into you're looking to get into broad strategies, or not a specific industry or sector. It's less about what the internship was and more about just how it contributes to your story and your narrative, right? So why did you take that internship? What was interesting about it to you? And then, how did it pan out? What was your project? What were you doing? But also, if you can demonstrate that you took initiative during that internship and, advocated for yourself to do, maybe projects that were a bit outside the lines that they'd initially drawn, that would speak wonders to me in an interview and in a resume. So the more you can really understand what this internship is, why they're bringing you on, what work they're hoping you'll help with, and also who you're going to be working with, because an internship's a great opportunity to find a mentor. Even if you don't end up working full-time at that company, they can still be an invaluable resource as you continue brainstorming and charting along your own professional career.
Great. There's another question that came in here about differentiating yourself during the application process. So Sarah is curious about, particularly when submitting your resume, but I would also add cover letter to this. And I'm curious to hear people's thoughts on cover letters, because I think, it's as myriad as different people's perspectives at firms in general. But, how do you, in a sea of applications, how do you set yourself apart on paper?
As I alluded to earlier, showing that you've done your research on the firm and that your application, whether it's the cover letter as well as your resume, are tailored to what the firm is looking for, that it really reflects the language of the specific requisition from that firm rather than something general, that it really reflects the values and the core purposes. Booz Allen is huge on its ethics and its purpose values. And actually one of the common interview questions is, how do you demonstrate these values? And showing that you've actually read those values and you know what they are and can answer that. And again, just similar to like why there's a YPEN essay for that. You're not writing the same Common App essay for Penn, and you're really explaining why you want to go there. Similar to with the firms. And that's why it's so important to have those conversations beforehand. So it's not just another firm, but it's one that you've actually taken time to talk to someone, get to know the culture, get to know the key purpose and values, and then can reflect that in your application. And so that you can actually write an honest application that after your conversation, you genuinely feel these ways and genuinely want to work here too.
I think along those lines too, attend info sessions if they're available. Right? It's a great opportunity to meet someone that you maybe wouldn't have been able to network with otherwise, and shows an interest in the company. But it all comes back to understanding what the company is looking for and positioning yourself and your background as to why it fits that.
I'll be super tactical on this one. We don't read cover letters. There's too many people applying, and it's not to say they're not important, because they're incredibly important at the firms that ask for them. But it's for us, it's demonstrating an interest, right? Talking to people, attending events if you can. That's a critical piece. But on the resume front, the way to stand out, in my opinion, this is just an N of one here, is you demonstrate some of the things I alluded to before. Accomplishment, right, can take on many forms, but showing an impact, whether it's a summer internship or whether it's an activity you do at Penn. That's equally as important, because I know some of you won't have necessarily work experience before this. Can even be a high school level thing, and that's okay. But it's showing that impact. It's showing other people are involved in your experiences there as well, because so often these students that we review forget that they're not operating in a vacuum, and it's all about their accomplishment all the time, devoid of peer interaction. And this job is impossible to do without peer interaction. You have to lean on each other. And if you can demonstrate effective leadership and working together, that to me is kind of like a secret sauce for a resume. And then sprinkling in some personality. I'm impressed at how often in my own interview process, people would pull out the last line of a resume, or the bottom stuff about your activities and hobbies, and like say, oh, you're a human, you like to read this, or you like to do that on the weekends. Like that's actually shows you're a person in a sea of paper, or virtual paper these days. But just again, super tactical little tidbits that I think can help you stand out in that stack.
Yeah, I would be shocked if we even take cover letters, but there's no way we read them if we do. In business school recruiting, they just have gotten rid of them at this point, which is the right move, at least for consulting. But yeah, I kind of peeling back the layer too, agree with everything everybody said. I think of the process, at least, and this is going from a little bit from the business school side as well, but I think I wish I'd known it when I was going through an undergrad. But there's two parts of getting the job, right? There's getting the interview, and then there's crushing the interview. The two don't have to do with each other, in my experience. Once you get the interview, your resume is a very small component of the rest of, if you get the job. It's how well you do on the case, and it's they're going to ask you, just like Bowen just mentioned, a question or two about the resume, but more just to know who you are as a person, and a few behavioral questions. That's all that really matters at that point. So this question is really about how do you get the interview and how do you stand out. And I think it is a sea of resumes. It's just the nature of going to a great school like Penn. There's just a lot of qualified people. And I think maybe this is, intuitive to a lot of you. It wasn't to me when I was a junior or senior, but like every networking conversation you're having, you should be treating as an interview. You should be incredibly poised, professional, but also normal and fun and cool, right? You need to be like the perfect secret sauce, because you have no idea what that person's going to do when they're done. Yeah, no pressure. I mean, just be yourself at the end of the day. If you're at Penn, I think you're a very smart and competent person. But when you finish up a networking call, and if it goes really well, you can always tell if it goes well or bad. It's totally normal to ask, hey, is there a colleague who you could introduce me to? Given our conversation, I am really interested in, XYZ part of the business, and I realize you're not in that, but if you could connect me to somebody, that'd be great. And that's how you can just kind of hop into your next networking call. And then sooner or later, you've had 4 or 5 of these great conversations. You're filling out Ella's chart. People at the firm start to know your name, and then you've kind of done everything you can, in my opinion, at that point.
I think that's such valuable insight, and because Penn is such a competitive place, driven student, it's the reason that you all got here in the first place. I think it's so easy to, when you were a big fish before and then you come to a pond full of big fishes, to feel like you don't, like, you just sort of lose who you are a little bit, or like you don't measure up. And so then they make strategies around trying to fit themselves into whatever mold they think employers are looking for. And it's really nice to hear you all saying, like, you need to embrace your own narrative here, and rediscover all the things that made you awesome in the first place. And yes, you need to be able to sort of do that naturally. Authenticity, 100%. Because if you can't be who you are in the interview, and if you can't lean into that, it's going to be harder to find those places that are a good fit anyway. And ultimately, you don't want to work at a place, I would argue, that isn't embracing who you are anyhow. there's a question that came in a little while back around navigating this as an international student. I think obviously there are more complicated pieces here, but and I realize none of you are immigration lawyers or in HR, but does anybody have thoughts or suggestions around that? I would say in particular for, one of the things I coach students on is like, when do you disclose part of that? If somebody has a STEM extension for their OPT, so they have 2 year, more than 2 years, if they have 2 years as opposed to 1 year, what advice do you have for international students, if any?
So one thing that I would say is just, it's probably helpful in the beginning of the discussions, just to understand what their approach is to international students. There are some companies, particularly if you're talking to boutique firms, that just don't have the capabilities to sponsor international students. And so it becomes a lot more challenging. And while it might be a company you're really interested in, if it's not going to work, it's probably, it kind of sucks, but that's just kind of the way that it is. And other companies, understanding the process that you might need to go through, it might just be a different timeline too. And so it kind of adjusts your expectations. I'm a big fan of, you want to know what that is going in early, because it allows you to use your time more effectively.
I completely agree with Harrison, and at Booz Allen, they definitely need to know right away you aren't eligible for any cleared government projects if you're not a US citizen, but Booz Allen does have international offices, and it has internal functions that I actually know a number of non-US citizens who hold those functions. So it's possible, but it is a minority of the work that we do, since what we primarily do is federal government and you need to hold US citizenship. And so I would definitely be upfront about that. And then I would recommend, for example, if an international student wants to reach out to me, I can connect them with someone that I know at Booz Allen who is a non-US citizen and has been through that process, and they can actually walk them through all of those steps.
I'd say the recruiters are probably the best. Like if the firms are bringing recruiters to campus, or there's a recruiting point of contact, they're going to know immediately what the answers are to those questions. So save yourself some trouble and just talk to them, or shoot them an email and just say, what's your policy around X? What's your policy around Y? And that'll get you a direct answer very fast.
Great, thank you. So many of you have touched on, key aspects to consider within a company culture. Ella, your organizational structure around that spreadsheet was amazing. You talked about some pretty key areas there: work-life balance, ability to advance. Another category would be training, compensation, all of that stuff. What are some, other ways to ask about culture besides just the obvious, like, what's your company culture like, that will really, if you're having these conversations with folks, help you, learn the key things about important distinguishing features about an organization's culture?
I think, as Bowen mentioned, distilling it into those categories rather than saying, what's your culture, saying what are the typical hours? What is the typical progression to promotion? What are even the promotion opportunities? What is the typical client like? I think rather than just asking blanket, but narrowing it to those categories, that helps. And then something I found really helpful was asking for an anecdote that supported what they were saying. For example, if they said the work-life balance is good, what does good mean? How many hours a week are you working? Or how many meetings do you typically take? You say the culture is supportive. What does that mean? I got some great anecdotes from Booz Allen about, the partners are very accessible. You can, contact them depending on their schedule for professional development and support. And so that was a really distinguishing factor for me. This is a really open and accessible firm. So really having those anecdotes rather than sort of blanket statements like it's good culture or it's inclusive culture.
Yeah, I would echo all of that for sure. I think the unspoken piece is that if you're at an on-campus event, there are people from the firm there, like they volunteered their time to come there. They're excited about being there. So they're probably like your best example of obviously there's no standard person or, personality of the firm, but I always took those people as, okay, like this is what the firm, as the best representatives of the people I'd be working with at the firm. And I think that to me is the most important part about culture, is just what the teams are like, what the people are like, how friendly and down to earth are they versus, more less desirable adjectives that I'll refrain. And then I think mentorship and all of that's super important. One thing we haven't really touched on today is staffing. It's a pretty big part about consulting, and it's pretty different across almost every firm, how they handle it, but kind of peeling back that layer a little bit and understanding what the culture is around staffing. How would you, have you been staffed up something that didn't work out well, or you didn't
David,
enjoy it?
sorry to interrupt. Can you, for
Yep.
those who don't know, can you explain what you mean by staffing? Because it's a very
Sure.
consulting specific
Sure.
thing you're referencing.
Totally right. I'm sorry. You get really sucked into it sometimes. So staffing is the term. The way consulting works is you're, at least at most firms, it's a little bit different, like I mentioned, but you're not always working with the same group of people day in, day out, year on, year end. Everything is project based. There are all these little projects happening. Each one has its own timeline, its own client, its own leadership that's managing the project, and its own, end goal, of course. And when you're particularly new to the firm, you end up just kind of bopping around to all these different projects. And the degree to which you have autonomy and power to make the decision about which project you get put on differs from firm to firm. The process by which you get put on these projects, which is, getting staffed on the projects, differs from firm to firm. And the degree to which you can, be still able to, move around and change your mind if you end up kind of finding yourself in one division of the firm or one type of project also differs, right? So the more you can understand those nuances and the pros and cons, because there are pros and cons to pretty much every method. If there's a perfect one, they'd all be the same at this point. The better you'll understand which one is going to mesh with you and which one, or what the implications that has on for the culture.
The other thing I would add on in terms of understanding culture is a good question is just what do people do outside of work? Like, do they get together outside of work? What are some of the company events that are scheduled? Is it all work and no play? Do they work together, but they don't want to spend time outside of work together? Which for some people could be just fine. Or is there a lot of lasting friendships that are developed?
Yeah, great.
And I'll just add really quickly, that's where it is great to speak to someone on a more informal basis. For example, the first person I spoke to at Booz Allen was a mutual friend. And so he was able to be very candid about like, yeah, this is totally the type of place where like people get together for happy hour after work, or people get to know things about each other's personal life. And there wasn't that need to build it up to something more than it was. And so I think it's really important to have those conversations so you get that honesty.
All right, fantastic. I'm going to ask you all in true consulting fashion to drill down final thoughts that you have into sort of maybe, one or two things, that you feel like if there's nothing else that people walk away from this evening remembering. There's lots of great themes that I think that have come out throughout all of this. What's the thing that people should absolutely not forget? So, Bowen, I'm going to have you kick us off.
Oh man, that's a tough, tough position. I don't mean to like hammer away at a theme that we've just talked about a lot, but take ownership of the process, get in touch with people, don't be shy. I think it's a lot of Penn alumni love to talk to Penn students and hear what's happening on campus and likewise share about their careers. So not everybody, but reach out to people where you share some affinity, in some capacity at the places you're interested in. And like I said earlier, have the go-to 5 or 6 questions that you really care about. And at the end of the day, if the consulting thing doesn't work out this year or next year, I think back to my own time at Penn, there were some really cool opportunities through career services that weren't in finance, that weren't in consulting, that weren't in the sort of buzzy careers that I think about my experiences there all the time. And they make great stories for when you interview with consultants. So like at the end of the day, do your diligence. I think, as David said, ask the questions and then cross some things off and add some things to your list based on that, because it's I think that's the most important thing to do, is like be smart about where you direct your energies in this process.
Great. Who wants to go next? I put Bowen on the spot first.
I can go. I've thought about something. Yeah, kind of actually segues from that. Well, I'll end with, regardless of what happens in this process, right? It is uber competitive. I think that's, the elephant in the room, right? Recruiting is recruiting. And I think everything that we've talked about today is relevant for almost any other job you're going after, whether it's the networking, whether it's the casing. I had a bunch of interviews with a lot of big tech companies, and casing is becoming a pretty consistent theme, at least on the graduate level. I would assume maybe, a little bit less intense at the undergrad level. And the skills that you learn from the consulting case prep are very transferable to any other type of interview business case. All of the due diligence, like all of that applies to any type of company that you're looking at, big or small. So I would also approach this process not as a zero-sum game, and that if you didn't get a consulting job this go around, that it wasn't worth it, but treat it all as, as Bowen said, part of the journey, part of your narrative, and understand that recruiting it's a skill at the end of the day. And you're only going to get better at it as you get older. And if statistics about anything with the younger generations are showing, like, we're not like the baby boomers or the Gen Xers. Nobody sticks in the same job anymore. So treat it as a growth and learning opportunity, and everybody ends up somewhere. It all works out.
I think I'll kind of build off of that and say that there's no one right answer in terms of consulting. Even within the life sciences space, where I've spent all my time, different companies approach it differently. And it's about finding the right option for you. And kind of going back to Bowen's point, the more people you talk to, the better sense you're going to have of what that's like, and the more comfortable you're going to feel having those conversations. The more you can enjoy the process, the more fun you're going to have. I know it seems simple, but it's a lot. It can be very hard to keep that in mind when you feel like there's so much pressure in finding a job. You'll find something. It took me several interview processes. I interviewed at Clearview 3 times before I actually got an offer. So it will eventually work out.
You get the final word, Ella.
Do your research on the firms and on yourself. So much of what makes you a competitive candidate for consulting is being able to clearly demonstrate why you are the right fit for these firms. And this may be the psychology major and me talking, but there is no better thing you can do for yourself than self-reflection and understanding what is important to me, where do I want to go with this opportunity? Where do I want to go with these skills? And not only will that be beneficial to you, but that will make the firms you apply to so much more clear. That will make your application so much more competitive. And I know we've joked about my chart, but any kind of tools or exercises like that help you consolidate that information and allow you to do that self-reflection are so key in this process. And I would not have gotten to Booz Allen if I first didn't understand what it was that I was looking for in a role like this, and then was able to communicate that in the interview process. And last but not least, feel free. I would be happy to speak with any of you individually. Booz Allen pretty much only accepts applications that have a referral tag to it. So it is really important to have those conversations. And so definitely feel free to reach out, ask those questions, have those conversations, and we wish you all the best in this process.
What a wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much, Bowen, David, Harrison, and Ella, for these candid, thoughtful, insightful journeys into the different various elements of consulting and the nuances. I really appreciate, and I know that our students do too, your time and attention. Students, thank you for your thoughtful questions. I put some resources in here about reaching out to alums. I imagine that all the panelists here, information is in YPEN. You can look folks up and reach out to them directly to request conversations or time to chat to learn more. Please, I encourage you all to make use of our many resources in career services. You've seen all the things I've been throwing at you throughout the program here, so don't hesitate to reach out to us. We do add new appointments in each week for the following week or two, and we will be closed from Christmas to the 5th of January, but then we're open again. So, use us as a resource. Thank you so much, panelists, for your time. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your evening. Look out for future CAMS events, the College Alumni Mentoring Series, so that we can have more conversations like this in different industries and topic areas. And thank you to Chrissy for sourcing our alumni, and to Gwen for handling our logistics behind the scenes. I hope everybody has a great evening.